Everyone. Well, to start off, I will let Anna, if you wanted to introduce and give us a little bit of background about the Crooks Corner Book Prize and what it is and why it's special.
Okay, well, greetings everyone. I'm Anna Hayes, and I think most of you probably know the little history of the Crooks Corner Book Prize, which was inspired by Parisian cafes, which offer these wonderful, prestigious literary awards. And I spent a lot of time over there and got so excited about the idea. I would come home and natter on about it. And finally, one of my friends said, "Well, just shut up, let's do it." And so we partnered with Crooks Corner, the wonderful, iconic restaurant in Chapel Hill, to sponsor this book prize. And we wanted to narrow it down to a manageable niche. And so we chose to make the award for the best debut novel set in the American South. And this year, we've just awarded our 11th prize to Bobby Finger for his wonderful book, The Old Place. And we just had the announcement award ceremony, which is AKA party, Monday night. And Bobby flew down from New York to join us in Chapel Hill for it, and it was a lot of fun, and we were all very excited about it. And the other exciting thing about this year's prize is that our judge is Wiley Cash, who is a very well-known writer with 4 novels and all kinds of other things to his credit. He won the first Crooks Corner Book Prize in 2014, and this year he was the judge. And so he has exemplified, the goal we have, which is to give a boost to a debut writer and help them launch their career. He has certainly done that. So we were delighted to have him as our judge this year. So that's sort of it. And I'm going to pass it back over to Robin and sit back and enjoy the conversation.
Thank you so much, Anna. Um, as she mentioned, this year's winner is The Old Place by Bobby Finger. So I'm going to give a quick bio of both Bobby and Wiley. So Bobby Finger is a journalist, pop culture critic, and co-creator and host of the hit podcast Who Weekly. His work has appeared in New York Magazine, The New York Times, Vanity Fair, and Jezebel. Originally from Texas, Bobby lives in New York with his husband, Josh. His debut novel, The Old Place, is available now, and his sophomore novel, Four Squares, will be out in June of this year. So our judge, Wiley, as Anna mentioned a little bit ago, so Wiley's Cash, A Land More Kind Than Home, won the first Crooks Corner Prize 10 years ago. Since then, Wiley has written 3 additional novels and founded This Is Working, an immersive online community for writers and storytellers of all levels. His short stories and essays have appeared in the Oxford American, Garden and Gun, Our State Magazine, and other publications, and his fiction has been adapted for stage and film. He currently lives in North Carolina with his wife and daughters and teaches fiction writing and literature at UNC Asheville. So starting out, I'm going to start with you, Wiley. How did you narrow the shortlist down from the 3 finalists to picking our winner, Old Place?
It wasn't easy. I've done some judging. I've been a little judgy in the past for some book prizes, and this one was particularly difficult. I think that what was difficult about it was I only had 3 books. I only saw the final 3, and it felt like an enormous weight, an enormous undertaking to discern my favorite among those final 3. I've done the Barnes and Noble Discover Prize, and I think we had 80 books, and that felt in some ways like less pressure. Um, so I don't know, I think Bobby's book might have been the last one I read, or maybe the second one that I read, but all 3 of the books were so wonderful, and they were all so different, and that was really fun to see. And I was familiar with the work of one of the writers, one of the finalists, from some other things that she had written, not novels, obviously. This is the debut prize. So I went into it with a little bit of an awareness of her background, but all of the novels were so different. And so I just tried to see what moved me and how it moved me, and if I was moved intellectually, if I was moved emotionally. And I think Bobby's novel, The Old Place, really moved me in both ways. There's a quote that I love by David Foster Wallace, and you know, Bobby's not doing what David Foster Wallace tried to do, and I would not have finished reading his book if he were, but it'd be too long. But David Foster Wallace said he wanted his writing to make your brain beat like a heart. And Bobby's book touched me on an emotional level, but it also spoke to me on a deeply intellectual level, and really made me ask questions about how our communities can be insular and shut out outsiders who walk among us. And that really resonated with me. And it was just kind of it just the book that I needed to read when I read it. And so it just really moved me in a lot of ways. But to your question, Robin, that was a long answer. It was not easy. And
No, that was beautiful.
all of the finalists were really, really different and really wonderful in their own ways. This was just the one that resonated the most with me.
That's awesome. That's really high praise. Thank you for that. I totally understand where you're coming from and agree with you. I mean, that's the whole point of stories, right? Is to make that emotional connection, to help people share experiences of their own and be able to get experiences that they may not have had before. So exactly all of the points that you were touching on, I think a lot of readers, avid readers, look for in books, is to be able to make that connection and to have them really touch them in that way. So thank you for that. So a quick synopsis of the book. It's set in the small town of Billington, Texas. The old place follows ornery Mary Alice Roth after her forced retirement from teaching. We encounter various characters in her orbit, and her tour de force personality impacts them all. The story comes to a head when her estranged sister returns home from Atlanta with a scorching family secret. So when the book was first released, it was listed as a Barnes and Noble book club fiction pick, and it was a Kirkus Reviews 7 September novels to look out for. So a lot of people were really excited about this book. It got a lot of accolades. So when I read the book, as we mentioned, it follows Mary Alice, and it does one of the things that I kind of love with characters. The pendulum swings back and forth in terms of my feelings for her, between disdain and sympathy, but she really evokes passionate feelings. So Bobby, what was your motivation for telling this particular story and for this character?
It began because I was thinking about the town that I'm from, which is a small town that's, I think, geographically, like physically, it looks like the town I'm from. Billington does in the novel. The town I'm from is called Dehennis, Texas. So I really did model the town's geography and sort of layout on this place that I'm from, that I moved away from before I started high school. It's the town that my siblings fully grew up in, my older siblings, and my father is from there. So it's close to my heart. It's where, you know, the Fingers are from. I was just recently back there over Christmas, and, you know, went to the cemetery and saw, you know, countless relatives, countless other Fingers. And it's not a name that you encounter very often. So it really just feels like this major part of me. And I knew I wanted to write a novel that was set in a place like that. And because both of my parents were teachers before they retired, I felt a closeness and a special awareness of schools and the way particularly schools work in small towns, and the dynamics that can create, and the way that those dynamics can shift over time. And Mary Alice was just, when I left Dehennis, there was something that, and I assume people can relate to this if they grew up and had kind of their early formative years in a place and then left it for reasons out of their control, because I was a child. I found myself thinking about that ever since we moved away, sort of all of the different hypotheticals that could come from living in this small place. Like what happens if you stay there when you really wanted to leave? What happens if you come back? You know, what happens if you leave and kind of always regretted leaving? And so I wanted to explore a lot of those different variations of how you feel about this place that you can kind of harbor a lot of resentment for, but then you also realize that it's where you come from and it's sort of what defines you very centrally. And Mary Alice, I just thought that combination of all of those things that I just mentioned created Mary Alice. And I knew I wanted it to be about neighbors. I knew I wanted it to be about someone who thinks that they can be isolated in this town, even though they really can't be. She kind of lives in the middle of further away from town, and then suddenly she has this person who she wants to interact with for the first time in a really long time, and she finally has a way for her child to have a new friend because of this, newcomer. But this is sort of, I'm sort of veering away from the point, but you mentioned that the way you feel about Mary Alice kind of goes back and forth, and that's one of my favorite notes that I got from my editor after her first read, which was that she wanted Mary Alice to be meaner at the beginning. She was like, I want her to be mean. And she was like, we can't really enjoy and sort of treasure the way that she changes and feel for her unless we kind of really despise her at the beginning, like make her nastier. That was kind of an early note that was up at the top of one of the pages. I think about that a lot. It was just such a smart note that helped me out so much early on.
Yeah. So Wiley, another one for you, because Bobby talked a bit about Mary Alice, and we were talking about how that specific character being at the center of the story really connected and moved the story forward. So what were your impressions, Wiley, as you were reading this of Mary Alice in the story, and also the citizens of Billington, because that was another piece of it as well as I was reading. Not just Mary Alice herself, but how she interacted with all of these other characters, how they not only interacted with her, but how they were impacted by her, and how they were impacted by being in the small town of Billington. So Wiley, talk about that a little bit and your impression of Mary Alice and the other citizens of Billington.
Yeah, when I spoke at the party, the Crooks Corner party on Monday night at the Crunkleton, I talked about how this book, I could feel this book kind of changing in my hands, and Mary Alice, her characterization was one of those things that felt like it was changing, and I don't think that's the best word that I could have used. I think what actually happens with the book, and this is why Bobby is such a good writer, and why the book affected me in the way that it did, is I don't know if Mary Alice changes so much in the novel. I think what happens is that we begin to understand her, that we slowly, the onion of Mary Alice, and that might be the best vegetable to compare her to, perhaps, is peeled away, and we begin to understand why she clings to things like her career as a teacher. We begin to understand why she marches into school the first day of school and bullies the outsider who's come to take her job, even though she left it. We come to understand why she's a tyrannical force in the church fundraiser every year. But we also come to understand why she's alone all the time. We come to understand why she's made certain decisions that she's made. And that's a testament to just creating, to Bobby's power of just creating really believable, realistic characters who are continuously revealed. And Robin, there was something that you mentioned at the top of our time together that I had forgotten about in the book. And when I love a book, but I forget part of it, that I said this as well at the Crooks Corner party, that feels like life to me. When I can look back on a book and think, oh, I forgot that part. I forgot that small ancillary plot point. That just feels like I forget that my neighbor dated my best friend's dad in high school 40 years ago. That feels like life to me. And I just kept having that experience with this book. And the characters that I thought I wasn't going to like, I ended up loving. And it just was such an interesting experience reading it. And it felt like small town. I mean, it felt like not just small town South or small town Texas, but small town anywhere. Where, in many ways, Mary Alice is the center of this town. Everybody's waits with bated breath to see what she's going to do the first day of school. Everybody cowers to see what assignment they're going to get. Everybody is curious about her family's history, but nobody really knows her. You know, she's the center of the town, but nobody really knows her. And it was just so interesting. It's so well done.
Yeah. Mhm. So, Bobby, you touched on it, a little bit, but, Billington, the way you describe it in this book, it makes the place itself feel like its own character. And that was one of the things that I really loved about this book. And you touched on it a little bit, in your initial response when you were talking about, growing up in, and I apologize, when I saw it written, I said Dehanus. That is not what
Oh,
you said when you pronounced the name
no
of
one
the
knows how to
town.
say it unless they live there. Yeah.
Yeah. But just the idea of how much the place where you come of age kind of really impacts you. Because I really feel that because I grew up in a large city, but then I came of age as an adult here in the South, and like those two experiences kind of juxtaposing each other really informs who I am as a person. And you can really feel that in this book, how Billington itself informs these characters and how they live their lives. So if you could talk a little bit about how that came about in your writing and how your life experiences, growing up in a small town informed the way that you wrote Billington.
When I was thinking about the novel early on, I was trying to make a mental list of small town novels that I really like, and in a lot of cases there are a lot of authors who have these fictional towns where they've written several novels set in them, and so I was kind of thinking about those and rereading some of them, and it's like James Wilcox, who has a fictional town that's set in Louisiana, and that he has several novels set in there, and they're all very strange, and they're all set in this very weird place. And all of Jesmond Ward's novels are take place in the same small fictional town in the South, and the Kent Harrop does it too with Plainsong and all of his other ones. And when I was trying to consider those books and think about what is it about these towns that makes them feel so lush and rich, in my mind, it's really just the characters and the people in them. And if you can create this small place with people who have very well observed and well formed dynamics, then the place seems more real. Because I was just thinking about the town is really just its people, and everything else is kind of just window dressing. And hopefully, it's very good window dressing. But I convinced myself, I hope rightly, that if I can make believable people and dynamics that make sense, and long histories, I think more than anything, it's like the small town element that really gets me is people who've lived there their whole lives. And you can live in a big city like Dallas or New York or Seattle for a very long time, but it's the quantity of people too. It's you don't necessarily live around the same people all the time. And so it's the complexity and the particulars of those really strong lifelong dynamics that I feel are really crucial to small town life and what sets them apart. And so when I was writing all of these people, I liked peppering in just sometimes subtly, sometimes not so subtly, but just reminders that even these adults who are in their 60s and 70s have known each other since they were children, and not just known each other since they were children, they've lived next door to each other since they were children. And I think that to me was like, that was the heart of the town, just the relationships between everyone who lived there.
Yeah, no, I totally understand that. Moving to the South, I wouldn't exactly call Durham a small town, but it's a lot smaller than the urban center where I grew up. And like you were saying, having those places kind of connect in your mind and in your memory. When I think about a person, that I meet that also lives in Durham, they're like, oh, this place. And I'm like, oh yeah, of course. And you can just connect the pieces because it feels so integrated versus when I'm talking about, the large city where I'm from, and they're like, oh, this place. And I'm like, wow, it changes so quickly. It's so large that, it doesn't feel quite as connected. So even though it's still an important impact on who the people are. It's very different and it feels different. And I feel like that really came through in this book, how the small townness impacted how the characters interacted with each other. So I really, really like that. So the old place itself is a place within a place. So how did you settle on that title without giving away too many spoilers? Because of course we know specifically what the old place is, but how did you settle on the title for the book?
I knew I wanted it to be called The Old Place from the very beginning, before it was finished, when it was barely an idea. And it's I wanted it to be about, specifically because I feel like the old place within the old place is the central like symbol of the novel, and it was just so important to me. But it's very meaningful. Like it just, everything resonates out of that place and what happened there, and the way that everyone who did come of age in this place, in this house, it really is, it's just a small house that's been in the family for a long time. Everyone sort of looks back on what happened there with different eyes, and I see it as this, I don't know, this totem that exists in this family, where they just think it's entirely defined by tragedy. And to me, the heart of the book is, I hope that these people have this sense that finally at the end of the novel, that they can make things better for themselves, and that they can get happier, and they don't have to be stuck in the past. They can look back on their past and learn from their past, but also see something hopefully more hopeful than their future. And so the way that the old place sort of transforms in the final pages of the novel was kind of always where I always saw it going there. And but beyond just like the symbolism of the old place in and of itself, because I couldn't think of anything else to call it. Like it just seemed so perfect for my own purposes. I was like, this is it. This means something to me. It was also kind of not an inside joke, but it's just a term that my family used. It's not a joke at all, actually. It's just a term that my family used for my grandfather grew up in Mississippi, and and then moved to Texas at some point. And then when he and my grandmother retired, they moved back to the plot of land where he grew up in the like middle of nowhere, Mississippi. I'm talking middle of nowhere, Mississippi. That's where I visited them growing up. And they built a little house next to the house where he grew up. I mean, 50 yards away. And that was the house where I always spent time with my grandparents growing up. But this old house that wasn't necessarily crumbling, but like wasn't in the best of shape, was just down the way. And I maybe went inside that house a couple times, and they always referred to that house as the old place. And I just thought it sounded good. I liked the way it felt. I liked like what it could symbolize, because to them it was just the old place, but to me the old place was kind of spooky and unpleasant. So just it meant so many things in my mind, and I just wanted to use it again in this.
Yeah, no, it's a perfect title. It's very succinct and simple, but it really hits to the heart of the story. I think it matches it really well. And also, speaking of beautiful simplicity, this cover is very gorgeous. Simple, colorful, bold colors. Did you have any input in the cover? I've heard before that sometimes authors don't always get to pick the cover art. Did you have any say in that?
I I had a little bit. The funniest thing I was told when they sent me the first mock-ups of, like, it's my first novel, so I was learning everything as I went with regards to how the publishing process actually works. And everyone was very kind at my publisher, like kind of showing me the ropes and helping me go through the motions and figure out like what happens next. Now we're going to do galleys. Now we're going to do this. Now it's cover time. And they did ask for um, initial thoughts that I had on what I imagined the cover to be, and I provided those. And I mean, I can say this now, they didn't match the final result at all. No, there was almost no overlap with kind of what I envisioned and what they did. But I love it so much. And the only input I had was I had some thoughts about the way that the house kind of should look. The colors were inverted, but I trust them so much. They know how to sell a book. They know how to make a book look good on a shelf more than I ever could. But the thing I was told very early on that I appreciated was that when they ask you for your advice, feel free to say whatever you want to them, give whatever edits you have on the cover, but also remember that they don't have to listen to any of it. And so I actually appreciated hearing that because I just think I trust them. I think it looks beautiful. And I think the orange is orange is one of my favorite colors. So it was just pure luck that it ended up being so, I don't know, appealing to me personally.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, partway through, I switched over to the audiobook version of this. Have you had a chance to listen to the audiobook?
I have. I love it. I love her voice, Barry's voice so much. I think it's really beautiful.
Yeah, that was gonna be my question, your impression of her performance, of how she brings the characters to life. I really felt like her performance did justice, especially because for me, like I was saying, the thing that stood out the most was just so much about how the place impacted the characters. And I felt like that really came through in her performance, which you wouldn't really think of initially, but I think her performance is kind of what helped me kind of parse that out. So did you have any thoughts on listening to it? Did you have any input into selecting her? And then once you heard the performance, what were your thoughts?
I don't know if I know I had input. They sent me, they initially asked if I was interested in potentially reading it. And I said no, because I did think it should be a woman's voice. And I think they agreed with me, but they did ask if I wanted to read it and I guess audition, because I don't know who ultimately makes those decisions. But when I said that, they said that that was sort of where they were leaning as well. And they sent me, I want to say no more than 10, but around 10 uh, performers in, a Dropbox link where they asked me to give my input. And her voice was, I just remember listening to all of them kind of in a row one afternoon and knowing instantly that hers was my favorite. It just sounded like Mary Alice, and it just had a quality to it that I felt was so warm and interesting. And she got the sort of, I don't know, her acerbic kind of delivery so
Yeah.
spot on, so well from like the first chapter. I think they only sent me the first chapter of each person. And it was all I remember really in terms of details was that hers was my absolute favorite from the beginning. And when I told them that, they said that they agreed. So there's just something about her. It was just correct. I knew it right when I heard it.
Yeah, when she spoke, you definitely felt like Mary Alice was standing in front of you. You could feel Mary Alice
Yeah.
like squinting her eyes at you,
Warm but
rolling her
intimidating. It
eyes.
was just so good. I couldn't have imagined anything better than that.
Yeah, but also her performance of Ellie, when she would switch over to Ellie's character, I could totally envision a different person, them as unique characters. And I think that's really the hallmark of an amazing audiobook narrator is, you know, them being able to separate those two characters within the same performance or multiple characters within the same performance.
Yeah, I thought that was also kind of extremely impressive because Ellie and Mary Alice obviously do so much communicating back and forth with each other, and they're so different. So yeah, everything about it was just a huge, just not surprise, but just like it kind of was. It was just what a wonderful surprise to have someone read this book and just get it, nail it from the very beginning.
Yeah. So your next book is coming out in a few short months. It's going to be called Four Squares. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Sure. It's comes out on June 18th, and it is not set in, my editor had a running joke where she wanted every book that I write in the future to be set in Billington, and they should all have old in the title. It's not set in Billington. It is set in New York City. It is there's an alternating timeline. So half of it is set on the main character, whose name is Artie. Artie's 60th birthday and then on his 30th birthday. So it goes back and forth between 2022-ish to 1992-ish. And it is about a person who has suffered a lot of loss, just like Mary Alice in the old place, and has become a different person from their 30s to their 60s. And the idea for it came from, I don't know, my own deep interest in not just the AIDS crisis, but the AIDS crisis in New York City, and the way that so much of a community was lost, and that these people who I've had like I do a little bit of volunteer work at this Center for Senior Citizens who are queer in New York City. It's called SAGE. They're wonderful. It's just a place for like older queer people to go and have a place to hang out, a place to socialize, a place to eat, a place to get help with anything they may possibly need help with. And in meeting some of these older people and just neighbors that I've had, older gay people specifically, it was just always so incredibly harrowing and sad, and also inspiring to know that this community that just still exists and is still alive lost half of their friends, if not more, when they were in their 20s and 30s. And they just keep getting by, and they just keep going through life as it changes around them. And I wanted to explore a person who kind of went through all of that, who moved to New York at a time when this was happening, when there was this plague that was killing all these people who could have been in his community and his inner circle of friends. And that's sort of what's happening on a broader level, okay, in the world of the book. But really, I just wanted it to be about friendships. It's a book in the same way I think The Old Place is too, about Ellie and Mary Alice's friendship. This is about Artie's friendships, the friendships that he had in his 30s, how those evolve. And in the 60s, when he's turned 60, I'm taking too long to explain this novel. I haven't figured out my elevator pitch for this book yet. That's something I have to work on in the winter and the spring. But ultimately, like, I guess you could say the inciting incident of the novel is he is turning 60. His a woman who he's considered his niece is moving away. His closest, I guess, air quotes, family is leaving the city, and he doesn't have many friends. And then he breaks his foot. And so in order to kind of get by, he joins this senior center, not unlike this place that exists in New York City and other places called SAGE, and has to make friends for the first time in a very long time, because he's immobile and he's currently, using crutches and in a boot and kind of in one of those scooter things. And he's kind of re-entering social life for the first time in a long time, while at the same time sort of remembering his group of friends from when he was in his 30s. So that's what it's about. I'm sorry that took so long, but as I said, I'm still sort of working now. I have to do that in 2 sentences or less. So
No, I appreciate your explanation and the background of the story, because as you were talking, one of the things that I thought about was how my friends and I just talk about just queer stories overall and in general, and how we kind of revel in my friend calls it queer joy a lot with newer stories like YA stories and things like that. But some of the pushback that I've heard just in general is, like, oh, where are all these stories coming from? Like, people all of a sudden are queer. And one of the things we push back so much is that, like, no, these stories are not new. These people have existed, but their stories are not being told. So I think that this is going to be a really important type of story and a really important space, talking about queer elders, because we talk a lot about, my friends and I talk a lot about how it wasn't safe for them to just kind of be out and just generally talk about their lives and how their queer identity impacted their lives. So a lot of people don't understand that, like, they think it's like a new thing with like younger people. And it's like, no, we have queer elders. We have people who have like Stonewall didn't happen to our generation. It happened to our elders, and those stories, are not propagated through popular culture. And so now to be able to see new stories coming out that center people who have not completely been erased, but in a sense, their stories and their experiences have been erased. And also, you know, you were telling us about like the Sage Center and things like that, and just people understanding like these places exist, these centers exist, these communities exist, I think is so important. So yeah, I was completely enraptured when you were telling us about this book.
That's like that's all I could ever want for is for someone to hear that and for it to like mean something to them, because I just, when you hear about, and I'm not by any means implying that this counts as like one of the lost stories, but when you talk to people or you read old letters or you see people's just photos, it's like there's this
Mhm.
whole chapter of, I don't know, queer history that it could very easily just go away because
Mhm.
it wasn't written about all that much at the time, and you just treasure every little bit of it that you get. And I don't know, it's I think worth remembering or worth being reminded to everyone, myself included, because I think it's very easy to forget that people who survived the AIDS HIV crisis in the 80s and 90s are still around. Like
Mhm.
it's very, very recent history, and I just think that that's something worth remembering constantly. And I don't know, it's a product of my own like sort of internal obsessions and things that I can't stop thinking about. But
Yeah.
yeah, I'm glad that sounds. I'm glad that you responded like you did. That really means a lot. Thank you.
Oh, of course, yeah. Thank you for writing those types of stories, and especially what you were mentioning about like the AIDS crisis, because I think that especially now as we look back on it and we understand more about how it was so devastating, not just because of the type of disease that it was, but because of the way our society responded to it. And because of the communities that it was impacting, and we see those same things being replicated. So having marginalized communities be able to tell how their identities impacted the way society responds to things that happens to them is so important for us to be able to not continue those patterns going forward into the future. And telling stories like this, like a Four Squares, is I think part of what's going to help drive that conversation forward and help people as we move forward just do better, you know?
I
So
hope
yeah.
so. Yeah.
Alrighty, so well, some questions for both you and Wiley, just questions in general about writing. Is writing something that you always knew that you wanted to do? Did it evolve over time? How did you kind of fall into this craft? And this is for both you and Wiley, both of you guys.
I'll go. I'll answer real
Shoot it.
quick. I always wanted to do it. I grew up as a reader, and I always enjoyed reading, and so I grew up with storytellers, and so it was just a matter of time before I tried to do it myself.
I always wanted to do it from maybe high school, junior high, but I always wanted to do it. I wanted to write screenplays. I wanted to write movies, and that's what I got a degree in. One of my degrees is in screenwriting, and then I also got a degree in advertising copywriting because I thought I was good at it. It was just a consolation. I could do it and more easily get a job than if I wanted to make movies, which I didn't want to move to Los Angeles. But the reason everything I wrote that was creative was just for me, just write it for myself, write this, write that, don't do anything, don't publish it. Same reason I did more journalism stuff just because it was a little easier. And I just never thought I was willing to kind of take the risk to try to write creatively, professionally. But I always wanted to. And then when I finally decided to, it kind of worked out in this amazing way with The Old Place that I just couldn't have in my wildest dreams imagined that
Yeah.
I'd actually get a novel published. But yeah, it's always been something I wanted to do. I just never had really any faith in myself, I guess.
No, I understand that. I definitely hear that a lot from aspiring writers. So speaking to that point, what is the most daunting thing and then also the most rewarding thing about writing?
You want to go,
You
Bobby?
wanna go? Yeah, I'll go. the most daunting thing is setting a goal for yourself. I like setting word count goals for myself that are weekly, not daily, where I'm like, if I can reach a number by the end of the week, if I'm really like trying to write less about the word count goal at all, but just like sitting down to write is the most daunting thing, because once I get started, I'm good. But it's getting started that can be the tougher part for me. And then the most rewarding thing is after a few hours of writing, and then you realize that you got some stuff out. That is every day that I'm done, I feel kind of equally rewarding. I equally rewarded. It's just knowing that I not necessarily took a chance on myself, but I committed to something, this like session of writing, and I actually completed something that may not be very good, but it really is like always rewarding to just look and see some filled pages, kind of regardless of quality, I think.
I don't know about if your husband can tell, Bobby, but my wife, whenever I have a day where I've gotten writing done, good or bad, like you've said, I feel my body feels different as I move through the world. A friend of mine is a writer in town. Wilmington's crawling with writers, but my friend Kevin Maurer is a journalist and nonfiction writer, and he says being a writer means you always have homework. And when you have a good writing day, it feels like you're done with your homework. And if I'm at the office that we used to rent, I would come home and my wife could interact with me and tell, oh, I can see that you got good work done today.
Mhm.
But I agree with what you said. The most daunting thing is clearing your desk, clearing your mind, putting your to-do list out of your head and all the other stuff you've got on with various work. And just sitting down and starting. That's the hardest thing for me.
Yeah.
And absolutely, when I have it's not even a good writing day, just productive writing day, just a plentiful writing day, I never feel better. And it almost doesn't, it's like, oh, it's 3,000 good words, it's 2,000 good bad words. It's all the same. It's just, I feel like I did it.
Yeah.
And it's always a better, evening.
Yeah.
When
Totally.
I hit that.
So, I think that these would fall into the just literary fiction genres. If you guys could write any other genre, do you ever think of dabbling in other genres? Which ones would you pick?
Oh.
Maybe a mystery. I could see like the Mary Alice
I-
mysteries.
Yeah.
I'd like to do, because it wouldn't be nonfiction. I'm not capable of doing that. I don't think I just can't. But in terms of fiction, I really do. I love murder mysteries. I love like kind of cozy murder mysteries, silly murder mysteries. And every time I read one, which is not super common, but it's pretty frequent, I can't prevent myself from thinking like, how would where would mine be set, in what house and what place, and like who would ultimately be the killer? I I find myself imagining myself writing those more than any other genre. Like I don't read sci-fi and think I could do this. I couldn't do that. But yeah, I think murder mystery, like a fun, warm, cozy murder mystery.
Bobby, if you put out a murder mystery series starring Mary Alice, I hope you get ready to cash some checks. People will
100%.
love that.
I
They
love
would-
those. Well, it would be tough. I don't think I could top when it comes to sort of retirees solving murders. I can't stop those Thursday Murder Club books. Those are so much fun. So
Yeah, I don't
maybe-
know. I
maybe
mean,
maybe they need a competitor.
I think they do. I think Mary
in
Alice
Texas.
stumbling and shaming her way through a murder investigation against her better judgment, and I think it would be awesome. I would read that.
Yeah, maybe
I
I'll
would
give it a shot. Yeah.
I would definitely read that. If I could do a different genre, what's interesting is I listen to a lot of audiobooks on Libro FM or the Libby app. But I listen to a lot of nonfiction. But I read fiction. I read fiction in print form, but I listen to a lot of nonfiction on audio. And I'm always really taken with immersive historical nonfiction.
Mm.
I'm listening to a biography of Willa Cather right now that just came out called Chasing Bright Medusas. And I just love those literary biographies that are immersive of a time and a place and a context, political, social context. I just find those fascinating. So I would like to give that a shot.
Awesome. And Taylor, you had a question?
Yeah, we do have one audience question, because Bobby, you had talked earlier about in the process of writing this book, reading a lot of books that are set in small towns. And so I wanted to know if there are other more specific literary influences that, and to Wiley too, if there are specific literary influences that have had the biggest impact, either on your style of writing or on the kinds of stories that you like to write.
Yeah, I can go first. The writers who I reread, which I don't typically reread novels often, but the authors I reread are Alan Hollinghurst and Ann Tyler. I just like I like the expansiveness of like Alan Hollinghurst novels. I like how they are very queer novels. And Ann Tyler, when I read an Ann Tyler, it's when I read an Ann Tyler novel, I get in a cozy, comforted, I don't know, introspective and kind of existential zone where I'm just like, I think about life. I think about my life. I don't, you don't feel it silences everything around me. And I think there's something about her, the way she captures the importance of everyone's life, no matter how big or small, and about the connections that they have with their loved ones. I think no one captures the how rewarding that can be and how crucial and essential that can be as she does. And yeah, so I love rereading her novels, and I love, like, my favorite book is not of hers, but although my favorite book of hers is probably Ladder of Years, if I'm giving something specific. And if I'm giving a favorite book from Alan Hollinghurst, it's definitely The Line of Beauty, which is just, I think, one of my favorite queer novels, if not favorite novels. But yeah, those were, and I was reading those kind of before and during myself writing The Old Place, just because I always am. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, that definitely answers the question, and if you ask me. And I love your description of Ann Tyler's novels. I feel the same about her work. I feel the same way about Gail Godwin. She's a North Carolina writer. She lives in upstate New York now. But she had a novel several years ago called Flora, which is a domestic novel set around World War II, set in the mountains of North Carolina. Just kind of a closed door domestic drama. It's just a gorgeously written book that reminds me a little bit of how you described Ann Tyler. But the writers that I'm always going back to are Ernest Gaines. I studied under him in graduate school, and he's far and away my greatest literary influence in terms of characterization and setting and dialogue and all of those little crafty tricks that writers kind of learn from other writers. So I'm always reading something by him, and I'm always reading Thomas Wolfe's Look Homeward Angel, not for inspiration in terms of craft or style, but just in kind of the torrent of language and his willingness to try to put life on the page in all of its complication and ugliness and beauty. And then Toni Morrison's Song of Solomon is a novel that I'll reread every 3 to 5 years. That book, Song of Solomon, is the first book that I read as a young person that I asked myself, how did she do that? How did she create this novel? That was the first time I was aware of craft, I think, of asking conscious questions about the creating of fiction.
No, it's awesome. Thank you both for that. So, a little bit lighter question. What have you guys been reading lately? And if you don't have anything that you're reading right now, what are you looking forward to picking up?
I can think of, it's the end of the year. I can think of well, I just finished it took me forever to get to it. The new Michael Cunningham novel Day, which was his pandemic novel, which I really liked. And when I hear pandemic novel, I get kind of like, oh no, am I gonna like this? And I usually end up liking pandemic. Like they're good. They're always quite moving. Um, a book that I've been kind of flipping back to I've read it once, but I've read the ending over and over again in the past couple of months since I read it for the first time was Brian Washington's Family Meal, which is another
Mm.
Texas novel set in Houston. And that book, just also speaking of the way that Ann Tyler novels can just make me feel, and the way that they can just shut out the rest of the world. All of his books do that for me, and and it's about food, and he writes about food so well because he's a food writer as well. But without spoiling it, the final paragraph of that book is just like so beautiful. And I just read a book that I got a advanced copy of a book that comes out in a couple of months, maybe next month, that I loved, called Ways and Means by a writer named, it's going to come to me in a second, Daniel Lefferts, I believe. And it's not like the other books that I mentioned. It's kind of twisty and fun, and it's just like a big hunk of just kind of a caper, but it's also quite sad. It's kind of a tragedy, but sort of a caper as well. And it's about, a young person's sort of mistakes and how they have repercussions after he graduates from college. But I really love that. Oh, and the biography of X by Catherine Lacey was like one of the most, to go back to just like form and structure and pure creativity, that was one of the most unforgettable, kind of like shockingly creative things I've ever read or have read in a while. It's like it's a fictionalized memoir of a person that sort of weaves in an alternate history of the United States that's so robust, and every page you're like, how is she creating this so quickly? Because it's not an incredibly long novel, but it's so dense, and that's something that I just kind of can't get out of my head ever since I read it in the summer.
That definitely sounds like my jam.
I've
It's
wanted to
so
read
good.
biography of X2. I haven't gotten to that one yet. I've been wanting to read that. I looked behind me at my shelf. I'm like, what have I read lately? But one book I really love that came out last year is Those We Thought We Knew by David Joy, who's a North Carolina writer. And a book I just read again is called Wilmington's Lie. I'm doing some
Yeah.
events with that at UNC Asheville about the Wilmington Race Massacre of 1898. There's a Ann Tyler book, and then Brian Washington's novel is right here at my left hand. But those are two books that I was really wrapped up in recently. Books that I'm looking forward to. Jill McCorkle from your neck of the woods, Robin. She was supposed to have a book launch last night in Chapel Hill, but it got canceled. It's pushed to Saturday. She has a new collection of stories out. She's just one of our national treasures. I'm really excited about Amy Jo Burns has a new novel out called Mercury that Mary Beth Keane gave a great review to in the New York Times over the weekend. So there's a lot coming this year. Tracy O'Neill has a memoir out that I'm really excited about. So there's a lot to be excited about coming up.
That's awesome. You guys have both added to my TBR list, which is already very long. But thank you both so much for your time. Before we close out though, Bobby, are you a Mission Impossible fan? I came across an article that I think you wrote about Mission
Oh
Impossible.
no.
Oh,
no.
I love Mission
I'm a
Impossible. It
huge
is
Mission
it's
Impossible
my
fan.
ringtone.
Oh, I loved it. Yeah. Did you come across the article where I saw Dead Reckoning 5 times in 1 week?
Yes,
Because I had to
yes.
see it in every possible format and sort of critique the differences. And guess what? It's good in all formats. But yeah, I'm a huge Mission Impossible fan, and I was absolutely devastated, crestfallen when I found out that they're delaying the new one by a year. Just
I thought you were gonna
horrible
say
news.
another thing that I probably shouldn't say. That's a spoiler because, like, yeah,
Oh. And
that
without
too.
spoiling, I'm not sure I believe that actually happened, but we can talk offline about that.
I
don't know
hope
that I'd
not,
buy
because
it.
I was devastated.
Me too.
But that's awesome. Always fun to find another Mission Impossible fan, because so many people are like, "What?" And I'm like, "It's our James Bond. It's America's James Bond. How
Exactly.
could you not love it?"
Exactly.
Right? But thank you guys so much for your time. This has
Thank you,
been
Robin.
amazing. Really
Thank you
appreciated
so much.
talking with you guys about the book. But I hope you
Yeah,
guys
thank you,
have a
Robin.
great evening, and
And
thank you
thanks,
again.
Wiley.
Of course. Congratulations, Bobby.
Great. Thank you
Congratulations.